Good morning or afternoon, everybody. This is Panama Bartholomew with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and welcome to today's webinar, Making Heat Pump Water Heaters the Right Fit for California. First of all, we'd like to, of course, thank sponsors of the Hot Water Forum, our platinum sponsors, Ream and A.O. Smith, and then also our silver sponsors, who you see up on the screen. So thank you to these sponsors and all the people that made this year's Hot Water Forum the success that it's already been. So welcome to our webinar today. As I mentioned, this one's about heat pump water heaters in California. California, as you're about to find out, is in the process of a transition for its water heating. And whether you use the term electrification or decarbonization, it is clear that the future of water heating in California is going to be one that is it's electrified, it's efficient, and it's grid-rated. And so today we're going to be hearing from three people who are deeply engaged in actually applying the products, working on developing products, and are at the cutting edge of thinking through how products are going to be integrated into the totality of California's energy system. So we have a real opportunity here in the Golden State about integrating a ton of renewable energy in through our hot water heating, through our water heating systems. And we're excited for the group that we have before us to be able to talk about it. I'll introduce them in a second, but a couple housekeeping announcements first. Your screen is customizable, so feel free to make the various windows as large or as small as you would like. You can even minimize them to drop to the menu at the bottom of your screen. Click through the widgets at the bottom of the screen to be sure you aren't missing any options. There's a ton of options in this platform. Presentations can be downloaded as PDFs from the resource list in the menu. Look for resource list, and you can download the presentations. Attendees are in listen-only mode, but you can submit questions through the Q&A box at any time during the podcast. You can see there's a Q&A at the very bottom. It's already got a little announcement. The presenters will respond to the questions throughout and at the end of the presentation. So I'll be collecting all those questions and then asking them of the presenters at the end. It can be accessed in the menu at the bottom of your screen if it's not already visible. All presentations will be available for an on-demand viewing within a few days on the Engagement Hub. And at the end of the session, we'll be opening chat rooms on the Zoom platform for anyone who wishes to continue the conversation for another 30 minutes and ask any further questions of the presenters. So all the presenters are going to be going into the Zoom chat room right after this if you want to have more of a dialogue with the presenter. So to access the Zoom chat, there's a chat room icon in your menu bar with the link. So on behalf of ACEEE, we wish to first recognize and thank our sponsors for the event. We did that. And now I would like to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers. They are Amy Nogengast from Bright Power, Pierre Delforge from Natural Resources Defense Council, and Jim Lutz from Hot Water Research. So those are our three speakers today. We're going to start with Amy Nogengast from Bright Power. And Amy is going to be talking about decarbonizing building hot water loads with heat pump retrofits in large multifamily projects. I'm going to do a quick introduction to California just to kind of set the context for the state, and then we'll get right into to Amy's presentation. So California, as you can imagine, has some pretty lofty goals for fighting climate change. They're listed on the screen. Here's Jerry Brown in his most natural, comfortable state, badgering somebody. And he signed, before he left office, a number of bills and executive orders, basically moving the state to 100% carbon-free electricity, as well as calling for a complete decarbonization of California's economy by 2045. If you look at where greenhouse gas emissions are coming from in the state, and from an end use perspective, so what are the end uses that are then causing the release of the greenhouse gas emissions, buildings represent just about a quarter of all of the emissions in the state. And so over here, all the way in the left part of the screen, you can see the buildings. This is a chart that shows greenhouse gas emissions from different end uses in California. And you can see buildings all the way on the left. And the buildings represents in blue all the electricity, the emissions from the electricity to power buildings. And then the orange part of the bar is direct emissions from on-site combustion of gas. And then the gray part of the bar is refrigerant releases. And so buildings are going to play a really critical role in whether or not the state meets those goals that Jerry Brown laid out for us and are now in law. The other big thing that's starting to push towards decarbonization and electrification of water heating is a growing recognition of the role of burning gas in buildings and air quality. This is a chart that shows from California's Air Resources Boards the daily emissions of nitrogen oxides, NOx, one of the leading contributors to smog, from power plants, from burning fossil fuels in buildings, and from light-duty vehicles or cars. And what you can see here is that even though we burn the same amount of gas in our power plants as we do in our buildings on a daily and annual basis in California, actually our buildings are producing 6 times more nitrogen oxides than all of our power plants combined. That's because we've done a lot of work on our power plants and our power sector to reduce emissions. We haven't done that same level of work on our buildings and the appliances within them. And in fact, our buildings are producing the same amount of smog-causing pollutants as all of our cars here in car-crazy California. We import most of our gas into California. And so from an energy independence perspective and having control over the sources of our energy, this reality of importing about 84% of our gas really puts us at a disadvantage and puts us in a precarious position when we have large events such as polar vortexes that cause a lot of demand in other parts of the country. We at the Building Decarbonization Coalition released a roadmap for decarbonizing California's buildings 2 years ago. And in that roadmap, we laid out what we thought we needed to achieve in order to be able to really have buildings play their role in the full decarbonization of the state's economy. And we thought that by 2025, we would need a code in California that called for zero-emission residential buildings, and by 2028, zero-emission commercial buildings, and that we need policies in order to be able to reduce emissions down to zero by 2045. And implicit in that is the recognition that water heaters and furnaces have about a 12 to 15-year life expectancy. And if you're getting to zero emissions by 2045, you probably can't be selling any fossil fuel appliances after 2030 because of that 15-year life expectancy. And so in our roadmap, we also laid out that we should be phasing out by 2030 the sale of fossil fuel appliances. In California, that's going to be tough because fossil fuel appliances have a significant market share for the 4 major heating technologies. This is for residential uses, and you can see that for water heating, about 95% of our homes, this is from the California Energy Commission, use gas in order to heat their water. And it's about 86% on non-residential. So you can see that's going to be a big transition for California. And thanks to the New Buildings Institute, here's a chart that kind of shows what that transition will look like. And right about 2030, there being an inflection point where we're starting to phase out gas and we're starting to bring in all electric sales and what that'll lead towards. So there's a number of different proceedings that are underway in California that are leading towards this. We have plans for reducing emissions. We have programs that are rolling out. They're starting to see incorporation into the building code. And then there is a proceeding that is kicked off of the California Public Utilities Commission, similar to Massachusetts and New York, that is actually planning the long-range phase-out of gas in California. We have a number of incentive programs rolling out. And so whether it's investor-owned utilities, state programs, we have air quality management districts rolling out incentive programs, municipal utility districts, local governments, and then our community choice aggregators. These are JPAs of local governments. They're all rolling programs out right now. And in fact, we have over $450 million worth of electrification programs that are rolling out over the next 9 months in California. So that was some context. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amy Noggengost from Bright Power, and she's going to talk about using heat pumps in multifamily buildings. So Amy, please take it away. Thank you for joining us.
Great, thanks, Pierre. I'm going to take the perspective of the contractor. And so today, in the next 10 to 12 minutes, we're going to be talking specifically about multifamily retrofits. So not new construction, but really on multifamily retrofits. And I'm going to kind of walk you through the process that we've done and go through a case study. So to talk about some of the challenges and some of the barriers and other ways that we've overcome them, and to kind of conclude with the role of hybrid systems and how that fits into the larger electrification strategy. So jumping right in here, let's see. So jumping right in here, there is electrification in terms of bright power has been going on since 2016, and there's been an evolution of how we've started. So we started with stand-in systems and really looking at manifolding different types of central systems, and then have moved now into commercial applications. And so these commercial applications have really found itself to be well vested in a lot of these large multifamily buildings. And so today I'm going to focus in on one heat pump case study here. Sorry, the slides keep moving. So yeah, must have been like a thing on there. But I'll talk through the one case study, which is certainly the meat of what I want to talk about today, is on retrofitting large multifamily buildings. So the client that I want to talk about is the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. And so they are heavily invested in San Francisco. They have 43 properties that do a bunch of new construction and retrofits. And they, I would say, maybe different than other real estate owners and operators, certainly have a bend and incorporate sustainability into their decision-making process. And so I think this is a really important context, because when we get later on in the presentation, sometimes the return on investment just doesn't make that business case to start to act, to start to actually engage people to act. So the study that I want to talk about today is the Soma Studio and Family Apartments. And so this building here is one of the largest of the TNC properties. It has 3 buildings, 162 units, and a central system that deploys domestic hot water and heating hot water to all of its tenants. So it was developed and completed in 2013. So it's certainly not the oldest in the profile of the ones that we've worked on at Bright Power, but it's certainly a good case study. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what the central plant is. And so Soma had initially, when we walked in, so this was in 2018, 2 separate systems. It had domestic hot water, certainly by 2 atmospheric boilers, and similarly for heating hot water boilers. So there were 2 separate systems, though they were manifolded all together with a central flue, which certainly turned out to be a challenge. So up at the top is what we were given with. Some of the other constraints that we dealt with is TNDC wanted full redundancy of both systems, of both their domestic hot water and their heating hot water systems. So we then had to think creatively, and what we wound up settling with is a combination or a hybrid approach. And so we installed a pretty large heat pump, which I'll show some photos of, which is intended to take 80% of the load. And then the other, and we consider the heat pump as kind of a base load. And then that peaker portion in the peaker plant is that heat exchanger, which is pulling any additional heat off those heating hot water boilers. So the heating hot water boilers were also new that we installed. And so while we are specifically talking about the heat pump water heater aspects today, this is certainly a part of a larger energy and water retrofit, which is certainly helpful to make that ROI work. So focusing in on the heat pump water heater system, we now have a combination system, which is certainly more complex than we typically see in multifamilies, but to make the financials work, to make some space constraints work, it needed to be in this dimension. So moving on, this is what our system looked like pre-retrofit. So in front of you, we are in the street level of that huge complex, the 3 buildings, 162 units. And you're seeing 2 domestic hot water boilers in front of you, a 1200 MBH, sitting on 2 concrete pads. I do want to orient you on the concrete pads because that will be a similar scheme as we go through a couple other photos. And some things to note here. One, it's great that we were on the ground floor because it means installation to get equipment out and in was relatively easy. There was a ton of phasing that had to go on with this, but I'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing to think through is up at the top, on top of the domestic hot water boilers, they were all manifolded together. So all of the exhausts came together from the heating hot water system and the domestic hot water system and went up one flue. So when we're talking about retrofitting, the exhaust is a key component when we're thinking of it, which might not necessarily always come to mind. So when we're coming on the property, we're certainly looking and trying to figure out what could be reused. And what's not pictured here are 2 tanks in total of 570 gallons that were in good condition and they end up reusing. The good thing about reusing things is it reduces the entire cost of the project. And so currently it's certainly challenging to make it all work. So reusing systems is particularly important. From this pre-retrofit, what we're going to do is we have to maintain domestic hot water throughout when we're doing a retrofit. So from your tenant perspective, as if there is no issues and no challenges to retrofit them. So there had to be a lot of staging that went on. So replacing one of the domestic hot water boilers while keeping the other online, so on and so forth. When we arrived, one of the boilers wasn't working, so we actually had to rehab it to make this whole transition work. Moving on, this is the installation of a heat pump water heater. So this is a Colmax CXA 25, the second largest in their family that they deploy. Things to note is it's a big unit and it weighs a lot. So this is crated, it's around 1,800 pounds. So definitely want to point that out to get it in and out of the buildings. And then secondly, airflow. So the airflow intake comes from on the opposite side of what you're looking at, and then it exhausts through the fan that's on the top. And I'm pointing this out particularly is because we started with exhausting the cold air out can certainly be a challenge in inside environments. But the reason why we chose to put this heat pump here is because we had access to the outside. This is a pretty nice way to do this because the ducting is pretty a short run out through those dampers that you see on the upper right. The big reveal photo, if you will, it was fully complete in January of this year in 2020. This is not the final photo. There needs to be certainly labeling and there's some insulation missing, but I do want to orient you. On the right, again, is that heat pump. It's that pretty large heat pump. In the middle is our swing tank. So in total, we added additional storage on site. And I'm kind of going to pause on design, but we can certainly talk about that at other points. And then on the right is that small heat exchanger that we needed to have this combination plant work. And so in terms of phasing, at some points, there was a time when the entire domestic hot water system was being run off that heat exchanger, which is great. The thing to orient you again is those concrete pads. We really tried hard to make it condense, to provide access to go around all the equipment and to service them, which is really important. And so I'm pretty happy with how this went through to orchestrated. But one of the things that I wasn't taking into account nearly as much is the sound level of these heat pump water heaters. They're very loud. So the published decibel rating for these heat pumps for this one in particular is 80 decibels. And so if you're not a decibel expert, roughly if you're driving your car at 60 miles an hour, that's around 70 decibels. And so this one's louder than that. All the audiologists, 85 decibels is where it's dangerous to start hearing. So it's on the high end of loud. And so when this was, again, installed in January and we turned it on and we were commissioning it, the challenge there was certainly people that live right above this boiler room and it was loud for them. So if you can see in the corner there, there's a huge plenum where we're exhausting out the ducting off the cold air. And that's certainly doing reverberations on dampers and causing a lot of noise. And so now where we are in the process is we're retrofitting the heat pump and putting on larger fans and really working on how to do that. So, okay. Kind of closing it off here and wrapping it all up in the last couple of minutes I've got here. So is the checklist. I think we talked through certainly reusing is really important. Some of those conditions on how to install and stage. The electrical capacity here was a little bit of a challenge in that our panel box was fully subscribed, but we did have to reorganize all of the circuits in order to put a 90 amp breaker in there for the heat pump. We talked about the airflow, water treatment's very important. Financials, Pierre certainly talked through incentives and property budget. It is this measure alone got over $200,000 on incentives, and it probably wouldn't have worked without it, in all honesty. And then the last thing is data monitoring. We put in extensive data monitoring on this system, in part because it's really important to learn from your hybrid units and learn from your system designs. And so I'm excited to share with you coming up. We're commissioning it now. And so I've been looking at the data. What does the COP looks like? What are the run times? And how do I encourage better design? So that's the intent of the data monitoring, and probably one of the better ones on the hybrid systems that I've seen. So to kind of tie up in my last little bit here to bring it all together, from our perspective at Bright Power as a general contractor, just for equipment costs only for these central multifamily systems, we're seeing the equipment cost for heat pumps is 2.5 times that of that condensing gas boiler. So they're expensive, certainly, to employ. So we have a higher upfront cost to overcome. What about annual energy savings? That too isn't the best story to tell. The orange, what we're looking at is annual energy savings. So there's 4 properties here that I just pulled from that I've been working on. There is a little bit of a cost penalty for converting from gas to electric. And that trade-off might be augmented with TNDC folks from a greenhouse gas reduction. So the blue are the opportunities to reduce your greenhouse gases through implementing these. And that's great. But the challenge, of course, is greenhouse gas doesn't always make it into the return on investment calculation. So we have an upfront capital cost and operating costs that make it a little bit more of a challenge to do, which is why this hybrid approach, where we're using a smaller size heat pump to take 80 or 90% of the load, and then we have a smaller backup, is really helpful to make these projects go and to give owners more confidence and to give all of the system redundancy that might be needed in any particular case study. A couple other things just from my perspective. We are certainly moving towards electrification, but this hybrid approach gives us a lot of ability to help educate the trades in the market. I talk to a lot of subs a lot of the time. We need people who understand how to service this piece of equipment and replacement parts that are easily accessible. And that's not always the case either. And so, in summary, this hybrid central systems is a really good opportunity and tool to get us towards electrification and really help iterate and learn on the design. So when we get to full electrification, we can have learned a lot of the tough lessons that are needed to do the systems well. So with that, I'll pass it back. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. That's a really fascinating project. It looks really great. Great work. I'm going to hand it over to, we have a few questions. I'm going to hold questions to the very end and we'll come back to it. So thank you for everybody for putting the questions in. Let's make sure we get the speakers their time, and then we'll ask questions. You can, of course, join us in the chat afterwards if you have any questions. So Jim Weeks is going to talk about retrofit ready heat pump water heaters, progress update after 1 year. So please, Jim, lay it on us.
Yeah, this is what we've been doing, trying to get heat pump water heaters that would be a plug-in replacement for gas-fired water heaters. So hopefully I'm running the slides right. Here's as Panama was saying, here, the electrification. The idea, this is what we're looking for, 120 volts that you can plug in, that you don't need an electrician in addition to the plumber out there. You don't need to touch the panel. You hopefully don't even need to run an extra circuit. And they're heat pump water heaters. This is why we're trying to do it. In existing buildings, you may not have 240 volt circuit. As Panama was saying, most of our water heating is gas. So where the water heater is, this is for individual single family or single unit in a multifamily building. Where the water heater currently is, there's probably not 240 volt electricity available. There's likely a limited panel capacity, so even if you could run it, you may have to replace the panel and Worst case, actually call in the utility to give you a bigger draw. This is to avoid having more than one trade on the site. Plumber's got enough to do. You don't want to ask them to be an electrician as well. And that can reduce the installation cost because then you don't have to worry about upgrading the electricity in an existing building, the electrical system. This is California. We like to do things differently. We have 16 different climate zones as far as the building departments are concerned. The target area is obviously older buildings. Probably the first ones to hit are also the ones along the coast. Climate zones 1, 3, 5, 6, which don't have air conditioning. Those, because without air conditioning, the panel size is going to be small. So it's not that this wouldn't work in the hotter climate zones. It's just that it's more likely to be needed in the coastal zones. This is derived from the California Electrical Code. If you want to be able to plug into an existing outlet, the Electrical Code thinks in terms of circuit breaker sizes, how big are those little switches back in the panel, or fuses if you have fuses. And we're talking existing buildings, so there may still be some of those out there. The circuit breakers come in two sizes, 15 amp and 20 amp, and that is determined by what wire size is it. 14 smaller than 12. And then the circuit type, whether there's one device on it or somebody might plug in something else on it. If you want to cover all the cases, you're limited to 900 watts. So how are you going to make a heat pump water heater that's going to work on 900 watts? Possible techniques, and I sort of don't, as much as I'm an engineer and I like to think of nifty ideas on how to make things, I want to not push too hard on this because that's what the manufacturers do and they're good at it. But things that we've thought of is no large backup element. The 4.5 kW element in the hybrid heat pumps is there because they were replacing the same size elements in resistance water heaters, and that's why the electricity is there. The existing individual heat pump water heaters for the U.S. are targeted to replace electric resistance water heaters, so the electricity is already there. They didn't have to worry about it. You could also do increase the water temperature and add a mixing valve to drop it back down. And I'm sure the manufacturers will come up with other clever ideas as they work on these. So here's the basic problem. The programs, all the things all those logos that Panama showed in one of the early slides, they really would like to buy these things because they can see, the upfront, the install cost is going to be much lower for replacing a gas water heater. But unfortunately, the product doesn't exist, and nobody's going to run a big program that exposes them to liability if a certified product doesn't exist. On the other hand, the manufacturers would love to sell heat pump water heaters of any type in California, and they see a lot of all the stuff that Panama is talking about has manufacturers excited. But to date, they don't see the demand. Heat pump water heater sales in California are still real low, and that's because of our history of gas-fired water heaters. And, they can't justify, they have a hard time justifying development costs if they don't see the demand. So that's what we've been working on this 120 plug-in. So far, there's one prototype that's been shown publicly. This was GE Appliances. It was shown operating at the Heat Pump Water Heater Expo in SMUD earlier this year. It's sort of hard to see on the slide. It's operating. The plumbing's a little funky, going into a bucket and hoses and stuff. But it is operating. It has hot water in it, and you'll notice it's plugged into a power strip. So it meets our criteria, at least the electrical side. The other thing is we do have specifications now, thanks to NIA. They've been running specifications for heat pump water heaters and trying to get the manufacturers to improve efficiency, performance, audience, consumer acceptance. And in their version 7, which became effective the end of last month, there's an appendix for plug-in heat pump water heater specification, and that lays out what's a likely specification for the programs to point to and say, this is the product we want, and it's up there for everybody to do it. We have monthly calls on the 120 volt plug-in status. We got buyers are ready. Redwood Energy is preparing virtual training sessions, and this is a nifty one, for contractors to install these heat pump water heaters in their own homes. So they get to experience it and see how it works. And then we also have consultants who work with multifamily low-income building owners and developers also on the committee, and they say they could use hundreds of them in the next year, half year. So buyers are ready. We've got manufacturers watching intently. In fact, several manufacturers have been attending the monthly calls. They are looking for support of the type that Panama was talking about. They want that to continue to drive up the demand for heat pump water heaters. They want help from everybody, and mostly they want to make sure there's a market there and it's going to last and it's worth their effort to do it. Let's see. Next steps, what we're working on right now is developing some guidance for installers, what to look for when somebody wants to electrify their water heating in an existing building, when you'll have to say you can't do it just because for whatever reason, when to go with a plug-in one versus when to go to 241. These are guidance for the installers, and we're also developing a documentation for the building inspectors and the building departments so that they acknowledge that these fit the code and work and aren't surprised and bothered by what they see. So that's it for me. I'll definitely take questions during Q&A. And we're doing monthly calls the first Friday of the month. Our next one, conference calls, our next one is, I believe it's August 7th. If you're interested, drop me a line and be happy to add you to the call. And that's it.
Great. There was a question. Thank you, Jim. Really, really exciting. Big changes coming. There was a question about whether those monthly calls are open to the public, and Jim just offered to, send him an email, and his email is now up on the screen right there. So JD Lutz at hotwaterresearch.net. He can get you on that mailing list. So thank you. Thank you for the folks for the questions and answers. And now we're going to move over to Pierre Delforge with Natural Resources Defense Council. There's been a lot of work over the last couple of years about getting load shifting incentives in place and load shifting standards in place. And Pierre's been right in the middle of it, much to his pleasure and chagrin. And so we're going to have him give us an update on those load shifting incentives and what the future looks like for load shifting with with water heating in California. So Pierre, thanks for coming and take it away.
Thank you, Panama. It's all pleasure. So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all on the attendance window. I wish you were in person, and don't we all miss Nashville and Portland and look forward to Atlanta next year, hopefully. So I want to, as Panama mentioned, focus this presentation on a growing area of interest in California, which is around heat pump water heaters, which is demand flexibility and grid integration. So we all know that heat pump water heaters are super efficient, 300% or more, but they also have other benefits, which are basically their grid friendliness, their grid balancing, which are increasingly important in regions with lots of renewables to integrate on the grid. So the ability to shift load from time of peak demand to times of peak renewable energy. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a quick overview of policy efforts in California to encourage the technology development and market development of load shifting heat pump water heaters. So let's start with these infamous duck curves. So if you haven't seen it already, duck curve is basically over a period of one day. This is just one particular day in the year. It doesn't look always the same, but roughly it's the shape of the demand, the net demand on the grid, which is basically total demand of electricity minus renewables. In effect, is the demand for non-renewable resources in California. And what you can see in the middle of the day, when you have plenty of solar, the demand dips pretty low and to a point where the resources on the grid are not flexible enough to ramp down anymore. So you have to curtail solar, which obviously is not the desired outcome. And then you have a huge ramp over 3 hours, 13 gigawatts of ramp to the evening peak demand, where solar's gone, sun's gone down, there's no more solar on the grid, and everybody's home cranking up the AC in the summer. And that's where we want to shed load as much as possible. So the two questions that are driving the policy debate is, first, how can heat pump water heaters help mitigate that duck curve? And second, how do we value the grid benefits so that we can flesh out the value proposition of heat pump water heaters and accelerate their market adoption? So let me take you through a quick slideshow to illustrate what water heating load shifting means in reality. You may have seen this already, but I think it bears showing it again just to illustrate what we're really talking about here. So the background shapes are the marginal system cost in California on a typical day. It's actually the average over the whole year. And in black, you have the typical load shape of an electric resistance water heater. So you can see the morning peak, which is partially coincident with some of the morning system cost, and then the evening peak, which is entirely coincident of the super high system cost in California. So this is what we want to avoid in particular. Then superimposing on this, the gold line is the same, a heat pump water heater serving the same load. So obviously it's much lower. It's just the efficiency benefit of going from electric resistance to heat pump. And then the next line is on green is a heat pump water heater with load shifting. And what you can see is that most of the evening load has basically shifted in the middle of the day in that window when you have abundant, clean and low cost solar energy available on the grid. So this is really what we want to, there's very little load left on peak, and we can absorb a lot of renewable energy. So this is really what we want to get to. And just with a little bit of coloring, you can see both in green the efficiency benefits, which are still dominant. That is the majority of the benefits you get. But you can, the cherry on the cake is when you can shift that load in the red stripes from evening to the middle of the day. And you can basically shift from gas water heating to electric water heating without increasing load on peak and by helping absorb renewable energy in the middle of the day. Obviously, in different regions, the grid will look different, and you may have to shift into different hours. But in California, the duck curve is the rule of the game. And another interesting finding from the study that we did about 2 years ago on this opportunity is that even without load shifting, without load shifting, we still get grid benefits from heat pump water heaters. So the pie chart on the left shows that grid coincidence with demand, hot water demand, is around 30%, 29% peak coincident. With a heat pump water heater without load shifting, you cut that in half to about 14%. And with load shifting, you cut it down to near zero, 1%. So it's really an additional benefit. But even without load shifting, you already get some grid benefits, at least in the California context, from heat pump water heater implementation. So a lot of the interest in California has initially been around unitary residential heat pump water heaters. It's been the easiest and the highest profile, but there is definitely interest from a program perspective to also look at central residential and a unitary commercial, and eventually also a central commercial, although that's a little bit further away. Even just from a code compliance perspective, they're currently not there's no pathway in the code for those systems, but definitely central residential and unitary commercial also have a lot of interest and are in scope for the self-generation incentive program I'm going to talk about in a minute. So it's not just about individual heat pump water heaters. I just want to make that clear. So let's cover a little bit of the incentive programs in California that are either already available or coming soon to incentivize heat pump water heater demand flexibility. We have 3 already available and 3 under development. So they're coming from a variety of utilities. SMUD, which is the 6th largest municipal utility in the country, for serving Sacramento. You have the 2 largest IOUs, investor-owned utilities, with PG&E serving Northern California and Southern California Edison, so serving Southern California. You have 2 CCAs, community choice aggregators, Sonoma Clean Power, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, serving areas in the north and the south of the Bay Area. And finally, you have a statewide program in the works, the self-generation incentive program, and I will cover that a little bit more in a minute. So here's a chart which gives a little bit more detail for each of these programs. I'm going to run through this fairly quickly. So the 3 programs are up and running at the top of the chart. So SMUD has 100 units already deployed and still ramping up. They had about $2,500 incentive for heat pump water heaters, which unfortunately are on hold due to the COVID budget uncertainties, but may restart and hopefully will restart soon. Still enrolling heat pump water heaters for the PowerMinder program with $150 enrollment bonus and $2 per month bill credit. Sonoma Clean Power has their Grid Savvy program with 59 units deployed to date and a budget for 500 units. The incentive levels are $1,700 to $2,000 for 80-gallon heat pump water heaters and a $5 per month bill incentive or bill credit. PG&E has a program that is currently in pilot phase, but ramping up with a full program budget pending approval for the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, but with a budget of $6 million and 6,400 units. And then the programs that are pending approval, but hopefully will be approved soon, is Southern California Edison has a $14 million budget request for 17,000 units. Silicon Valley Clean Energy has an 80-unit pilot program in the works. And then the big elephant in the room is the statewide self-generation incentive program, which is a program which has historically focused on solar and then fuel cells and batteries, and now is expanding to heat pump water heaters with a $45 million budget. And that's currently being designed, and we expect the launch in early 2021. So a lot of activity. I just have one more slide just showing the SGIP timeline, given how critical and large scale this program is. We expect a staff report in September, a final decision by the PUC by the end of the year, and then a program launch in 2021. So a quick one on the different incentives. So far, we've talked a lot about the capital cost incentive for buying down the equipment cost and installation cost. We have talked a little bit about bill credits. I think rates are another way to provide financial incentives for operating costs. And the last type of incentive that's being rolled out is a compliance credit incentive in the building code through the Joint Appendix 13 or J13, which is a specification in the building code that allows builders to get a compliance incentive if they install a heat pump water heater with load shifting. So that was just adopted by the Energy Commission earlier this month, and will be likely available in the compliance software later this year in the fall. So ready to go in the current building code as early as late this year. So very quick, and I'm running short on time. So a quick summary. This Joint Appendix 13 has two major requirements. One is to have both local time of use control, and the other one is to have a grid connected capability. And it's not either or, it's both. And the idea is that if you don't have either a grid connected program available, or the customer doesn't opt in, then which we know is a challenge still, you have a capability to give every customer with a time of use rate, and every customer in California is moving at time of use rates, the ability to optimize their bills and provide grid benefits by providing load shifting based on that local time of use schedule. I'm not going to cover this in just one sentence. There are a lot of related standards. I know it can be confusing, but the good news is these standards are largely complementary with J13, and where they overlap, they are consistent. So they address different things, from performance to connectivity to OpenADR is more the connectivity stack upstream from the site. So all of these are really important, and they are all working together. So my conclusion, I know I'm out of time, but I just want to cover the key takeaways from this. So we have basically the emerging needs to electrify gas water heating in California and meet the goal that Panama described without adding peak load. This will reduce user bills and help the transition to 100% carbon-free grid, which is one of California's policy goals. And the policy and technology are both moving very fast on this front, and we expect significant market adoption in the coming year. With that, thank you, and looking forward to questions.
Awesome. Wonderful, Pierre. Thank you very much for that. So we have some time for questions and answers now, and then again, right after this, we're going to have about 30 minutes of a Zoom-based chat. And at the bottom of your menu, you should see a little widget that has 3 heads with a chat bubble above it. And so at the top of the hour, if you want to click that, you can join us in a Zoom chat. But right now, we'll take the questions that have been submitted via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So first of all, we'll start with one. Pierre, I think this is a good one for you. It's important to clarify that decarbonization and electrification are 2 different things. They're not the same by definition. You want to speak to that, Pierre?
I'm sorry, what's the question again? I'm not seeing it here.
The difference between decarbonization and electrification. The questioner wanted to make sure that we're explicit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So decarbonization, as the name implies, is about the outcome that we're looking for is reducing carbon and meet our goals for deep decarbonization of the economy. Electrification is a critical strategy to achieve that, but it's not sufficient by itself. We still need electrification, energy efficiency, load shifting, as we just discussed in my presentation. Those are, and obviously clean energy to power these electrified loads. So these are the 4 key pillars of decarbonization. Electrification is just one critical strategy to achieve that.
Great, thank you. The next question was about, has anybody put together a timeline for all the different programs that we put up there? And I put a link into the question and answer box. And so there's a link to a resource that shows all the different programs, their money, who's rolling it out. So you can see that right there. A question for Amy. So to clarify, the heat pump case study you had there, is that electric for the peak as well? Or is this baseload, is just baseload viewed as for domestic hot water? And then how much additional work did you have to do for the noise issue? And did that add much to the price?
Yeah, so good question. Certainly, the heat pump water heater is intended as the base load, so certainly that's all electric. But that peaker plant, so the addition above the 80%, which is modeled, I think it's actually going to be higher. But the extra is certainly from the condensing heating hot water boiler. So there is the gas that's using as that peaker. So the hybrid approach takes the approach of the heat pump water heater, super expensive. We can scale it down and view the majority of the load. While that peaker could be from gas, it could be from a smaller multi-pass heat pump, it could be from, dare I say, electric resistance or other technologies that can also provide that other one. In terms of the noise addition, so yeah, we are currently in the midst of retrofitting it, which is why I was hoping to give you all of the analytics of what we've done from January to today, but there's been certainly a lot of retrofitting that's gone on to see how we can reduce the sound, which is increasing the fan size, which, how to do the plenum. So I don't have a good answer yet on how much it's cost to retrofit it. It is certainly something that absolutely needs to be taken into account in all retrofits, specifically on these like larger commercial systems, because they're pretty loud. And, certainly by code in San Francisco, we have a police code that says you can't be above 55 decibels during the day. So it's something we certainly need to take into account in multifamily and large central systems. Was there another question, Panama, on that front, or did I answer the majority of them?
Two people want to know, when will you have a public paper available, a report on the results of the data monitoring and lessons learned?
Yeah, so, we are general contractors that do large energy and water retrofits, and we are constantly trying to, bring forward our designs and our analytics. I would like to say that we would make a formalized report. Certainly, the presentations in this forum is a little bit more palatable for us and blog post, but more of like the formalized broader is a little bit harder just in terms of bandwidth, whether we're on sites and trying to do construction. This is certainly an aspect that I'm very interested in. Interestingly, actually, I have an intern working with me this summer that's looking at all of our systems and load shifting. So to Pierre's comment, like we want to understand like how much more would I have to add in terms of gallons of water to actually do load shifting on all of the projects that we're looking at. How feasible does that look at? So while I would love to have when is the report available, I don't have a good sense yet. I guess step one is I want to get all these retrofits done on the noise so I can help finish and close that story. And then start to touch the questions on like what the COP actually is. Like we've got manufacturers information and then we've got actual in practice. And what I've been seeing so far is that Delta is very different among a bunch of other things. So I don't have a good deadline. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to partner and engage, but I don't have a ton of like extra, hobby time to do a formalized report. But I think there'll be other ways to certainly distribute the information.
Great, thank you. Pierre, a couple questions about load shifting. One, with load shifting, is there still plenty of hot water in the evening? Are you still allowed to take showers at night when you load shift? And then two, how many water heaters would be needed to significantly flatten the duct curve?
Yeah, great. So the specification for load shifting has been designed so that you always start the evening peak period with a full tank, and sometimes a tank at a higher temperature, using higher temperature storage. So it's really designed so that there's no impact, and the customer would not notice. It's a no compromise solution. And the other point that helps achieve that is it's not a hard turn off of the water heater during that period. It's just saying, as long as you can meet customer needs, stop, don't work, don't recharge. But if you are running low, then these water heaters can turn on. So most of the time we will not need to, but if they have to, they can still turn on. So it's not a hard switch off, just to make sure that there's no customer impact at all. The second question I see just above from Kevin is how many water heaters would be needed to significantly flatten the duct curve. Well, our estimate is around, if you were able to, or when we are able to electrify all water heaters in California, and if they're all load shifting, it will be around 2 gigawatts of flexible power. So in context, it's about 15% of the current ramp, which is very significant. And obviously, water heaters are not going to solve the duck curve by themselves, but being able to address 15% of the ramp and then adding other things like EV charging, obviously commercial and industrial loads that have a role to play as well. That's a very significant contribution to California's duck curve issues.
I think this is like on-site, say for your house or another application.
I'm sorry, what was that, Panama?
How much storage volume do you need to do load shifting?
So the specification for load shifting requires a minimum amount of storage, which is basically what is also required by the plumbing code. So you don't need, obviously, if you have a bigger tank, you're going to get more load shifting, but you don't actually need to have a super large tank. You just need to have a well-sized heat pump water heater will be able to shift the majority of the typical load in home.
Great. Tristan has a question, unsurprisingly, about J13. I see the final language of J13 requires NEA Tier 3 version 7, which requires a CTA 2045 port on the water heater. But, in capital letters, the requirement for NEA Tier 3 version 7 is in a section on energy efficiency. Do you think some OEMs will interpret this to mean that they only have to follow the energy efficiency piece of NEA Tier 3 V7?
Yeah, so I can't speak for the manufacturers on this, but I think it was pretty clear in the working group who developed this that V7 does require CTA 2045. That was part of the discussions that we had earlier this year. So that's my perspective. I mean, and then that's something that we have to discuss with the manufacturers.
Great. And then for any of you all, a question from Lafayette College. Is there competition between the installation of heat pump water heaters and the load shifting of electric resistance water heaters in California?
Yeah, this is a good question. So there are very few electric resistance water heaters in California, and the direction is clearly toward heat pump water heaters because of the energy efficiency goals and decarbonization goals in California. That said, no, there are maybe around 5% of water heaters that are electric resistance today, and there are opportunities to retrofit those existing electric resistance water heaters to do load shifting themselves. But the policy direction is to replace them with heat pump water heaters wherever it's possible to do. And we want both the efficiency and the flexibility benefits for heat pump water heating, not just one or the other. And this presentation and the studies and the work has been done in California show that you can get both, and that's what we want to achieve.
Okay, wonderful. Jeff, just a reminder about calling, what we're calling these are smart water heaters, these grid-enabled water heaters. I'm not seeing any other questions in the question and answer box. And so what we're going to do is we're going to now hop out of rooms. Think you're at the hot water forum and you have just finished up a session and you're walking out, and ACEEE has provided all the wonderful snacks and locally appropriate treats that they always provide for you. And so there's wonderful snacks aside, and these 3 speakers are now all going into that room, and you have a chance to now interact with them in a less formal, more of a Zoom-based dialogue. So at the bottom of your screen in your menu tab, you should see 3 little heads with a chat bubble on top of it. If you press that, that should take you to the Zoom room where all of these speakers are now going to go. We're going to leave this webcast live for about 30 seconds so you can grab the link. But if you want to continue this conversation with these excellent speakers, please click on that and see us over in Zoom. Thank you so much to all the speakers, and thank you all so much for attending. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the conference. Thank you very much, all. Have a good one. Maxine, Tristan seems to have problems with the link. Amy and Jim, I think you guys can leave this platform now and go over to the Zoom room. Tristan, we're not seeing the problem from anybody else, oddly enough. And I think I only have the link to come in as a presenter, but I will try to send you something right now. So Tristan, I'm sending you an email right now. Okay. It's on its way over to you, Tristan. Oh no, Anders, so sorry to hear that. Yeah, it's the same case for Southern California Edison. Anders, that would probably be some good feedback for the organizers about platform choice if next year Zoom is still blocked for you all. I would hope that Zoom is feeling the pain from losing all these enterprise customers and is dealing with their security issues. All right. Thank you, Maxine. You did a great job. Really appreciate all the help. See you, everybody.